Hi everyone, I'm Sahar El-Nadi welcoming you. Thank you for tuning in to this exclusive interview from my channel, The Peacock Trap, the leading source of education on narcissism in Arabic. Our guest today is a very special guest, Dr. Ramani, clinical psychologist with a PhD from UCLA, professor of psychology at California State University, Los Angeles, where she was named Outstanding Professor in 2012. She's also visiting professor at the University of Johannesburg and the chair of a committee at the American Psychological Association. Dr. Ramani was also featured on major American television and radio networks, including National Geographic, the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, as well as in many documentaries on health and narcissism. She authored valuable books on relationships and narcissism. We'll talk about that in a minute, but first let me welcome her to the show. Dr. Ramani, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me.
You're all the way from California, and it's very early in the morning, so thank you very much for giving us the time.
It's all good.
So many of my listeners have asked me repeatedly to invite you for a special conversation, so I'm glad we can make this happen. Is this your first interview with an Arab personality?
I have spoken with people in the Arab world because this is a very compelling topic in that region. But this is the first time I've done it sort of in a oral format. And so
perfect. That's
Yeah.
great. I'm very happy for that. You are actually the first woman professional I'm hosting in this series. So we'll talk quite a bit today about women in relationships.
Yeah.
So why narcissism, Dr. Ramani? You're a professional. You could have, as a clinical psychologist, you could have focused on any other topic. So why narcissism?
I actually think this is the mental health issue of our time. I think that we think mental health, we think mental illness, we think of depression, we think of anxiety, we think of substance use. However, what I am seeing in a therapy office where I see clients is that the effects of narcissism in their relationships, in their family, in their workplace is what's causing them the distress and often the symptoms, including depression and anxiety, that bring them into my office. I've also worked on this area as a researcher and looked at how these difficult, high-conflict personalities actually can make healthcare more difficult to deliver because they frustrate the nurses. These kinds of personalities frustrate nurses and doctors. These kinds of personalities often can be difficult in terms of giving them medical recommendations. So that also has ramifications. And then I've also seen this in the workplace and how what this can do is not only negatively affect workplace relationships, but also can cost workplaces lots of money. There's lots of risk of things like litigation. People with these personalities are more likely to sue. They're more likely to take advantage of coworkers, and these are expensive kinds of issues. So this is an expensive problem. It's a problem that can cause physical health problems for people who are victimized by it, and it can cause people all kinds of mental health issues. So I think it's really sort of a mental health lightning rod.
Okay, great. In my previous episodes and interviews, we focused more on learning about the narcissistic personality, just as you have described the troublemaker person who is abusing everybody, the abuser. But now we're more focused to shift the attention to understanding what makes somebody a potential victim of narcissistic abuse and how we can protect ourselves. In your experience, what are the top 3 traits that make someone a prime target for a narcissist?
Being very overly empathic, giving people many chances and always making apologies for them, and lack of knowledge, not understanding what these personality styles are, and then, again, forgiving, apologizing, and then not valuing themselves. So I guess in that last category would also be people who don't recognize their own self-worth.
It's perfect that you said the lack of information, because that would tell our listeners everywhere how important it is to focus and try to understand and try to learn from those professionals like yourself who put out their information so that people can benefit from it. I've noticed from the interaction on my channel and Facebook that many women become obsessed with analyzing and diagnosing their narcissists and getting so caught up in this process that they forget to think of themselves. How can they help themselves shift their focus back to themselves and to healing and moving forward instead of getting caught up in ruminating?
I actually wish people wouldn't get so caught up in trying to put a label on it. I must get 100 emails a day from people saying, I need to know if my partner's a narcissist. I say, why? My guess is If you've emailed me, your partner's likely verbally abusive, invalidating, dehumanizing, doesn't see you, doesn't hear you, tries to control you. I don't know why you need a label for that. None of that is healthy. And so by focusing so much on the partner and getting a label and almost like a rationalization, they really should focus on how they feel in this relationship. If they feel unseen, unheard, invalidated, and disrespected, there's something wrong. It doesn't matter what the label is on their partner. And then to focus on you, ask yourself, why are you enduring this and how you can do this differently? Because the fact of the matter is, you cannot change a narcissist. The only thing you can do is focus on yourself, how you respond to the situation, and what you can do going forward.
That's a very good point you brought up, because also we get asked the same question in this part of the world as well. People are so caught up in putting a label on it, and we keep saying, please don't, waste too much time on that. You should heal yourself. So there's a specific point you explained so well in one of your episodes, where to draw the line between someone's healthy desire for us or interest in us and possessiveness and controlling behavior. In my culture, one of the first things a man does in a relationship is to do exactly as you warned, gain total control, starting by preventing contact with anyone else, rage over the slightest hint of autonomy, and then explaining his behavior as too much love. So women translate that into healthy jealousy. They think he's so into me that he wants me all to himself. But you say this is actually a red banner, a lot worse than a red flag. Why?
Absolutely, because I'll tell you why. Isolation is one of the worst things you can do to a human being. This idea, I want you all the time. I want to spend all my time with you. Why do you need to spend time with your friends? Why do you need to spend time with your families? Once you isolate someone, you can control them because they never get to hear another opinion. They never get to hear the feedback of other people. It's almost as though then the narcissist can run that person's reality because they've isolated them from everybody else. And slowly but surely, again, it's almost like a brainwashing. It's like getting into a cult. Exactly. They just follow the partner because they have no access to other people. In addition, rage is not acceptable. It really is not. So given that little things will set that person off, like, oh, you talk to somebody else, how dare you, I love you so much, and framing it that way, rage and love do not belong in the same sentence. Mm-hmm. It's just not acceptable in an intimate relational context. Unfortunately, especially for younger women, we often romanticize this idea of jealousy and control, and they don't want anyone else to be with me. But I always tell people, the first time somebody starts questioning your healthy relationships with other people, family members or friends, that is a dangerous sign that this relationship is going into a very dangerous space. Because ultimately, that person, the narcissistic person's insecurity is why they need to control you. Once they control you in one area, for example, isolating you from other people, then they're going to control you in every area. They're going to control your career, your ability to get an education, your money, your comings and goings, and then before you know it, you blink your eye and you're a prisoner.
Mm-hmm. And so we need to learn to establish and uphold personal boundaries. How, in your opinion, can people do that who have not been raised, who are not used to the idea of having boundaries, and who are asked to try to establish them in order to protect themselves against abuse?
This is a great question, and it is something that I have faced from many, many people from cultures where, sadly enough, coercive control starts becoming a strangely normal part of relationships. I do tell people to monitor this early. I think that the mistake people make is once you wait 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, especially in cultures where control is a classical part of relationships, it becomes almost impossible to extricate yourself from that relationship. So in the first few weeks or month is your chance to really pay attention. And if the conversation is drifting to this place of, I need to see you all the time, I need to know where you are all the time because I am so excited about you, pay attention to that. Because while you may feel like you're in a romantic fantasy, the earlier we set boundaries, the more important. So I think that time is your friend. Mm-hmm. That when that is, and a person says, I need to know where you are all the time, and it's only the first week you've known someone, that early in the game is an opportunity to get out of it and come up with an excuse that's plausible. I'm so sorry, I can't do this because of family issues or school issues or job issues. That's a lot easier to do in the first week than it is in the first
Then
2 or
later.
3 months. But I do think part of this then becomes a larger cultural conversation. As long as people's parents are normalizing this, television shows normalize this, media normalizes this, that this obsessive controlling, I need to be with you 24 hours a day or it's not a love story, as long as we make that part of the romantic storytelling, we've got a problem.
Yes, definitely. And I totally agree with you about the dangers of the media and the romance novels and all this kind of thing that normalizes that abuse and strict control is part of love. So what created this vulnerability of wanting to be wanted? How does a victim develop an excessive need for intimacy and a toxic fear of abandonment and loneliness? How can we better understand our own stories, as you have explained that in one of your episodes?
I think stories come from many places. Stories come from our families. Stories come from our culture. Stories come from our media. But stories also play upon some of our own inherent fears. In any culture where a group is devalued, like let's say, for example, women may hold less power in a certain society, they're going to often be stuck in a position of fear, because it will be less easy for them to exert their rights and things like that. So there may be more fear that if a person's in a relationship and that relationship goes away, that puts that woman in a more precarious sort of position. And so because of that, what we have to do is look at where sort of these fears come from. In addition, what we do, and this is not just in certain cultures, I think this is a global phenomenon.
Is it? Okay.
This idea of, in the first few weeks of the relationship, feeling sort of swept away. I have to say that one of the sort of, conflicts or unresolved issues that many people bring from childhood is many times they didn't feel adequately seen or heard by their parents. They take that from childhood into adulthood and crave that desire to be overly seen, overly heard. So when someone controlling comes around and gives them too much attention 24/7, it's very seductive and may make up for that deficit that a person had in childhood of feeling like nobody was paying attention to them. For example, their own parents may have been narcissistic and wouldn't really pay attention to them. So when someone comes along, like I said, and pays too much attention, that can be very seductive. Finally, what does happen too, and I often call this an addictive cycle. In the early part of the relationship, the addiction is the excitement over someone being so interested in you, wanting to spend so much time with you, lavishing so much attention on you, that you start to think, well, wow, it's like a drug, right? It feels so good.
Yeah, definitely.
Then one day, and all narcissists do this, they become less interested. They may still control the person, want to know their comings and goings, isolate them from family and all of that, but they're no longer really interested in the person. It's almost like they've trapped them, so they don't need to pay attention to it anymore. It's like trying to buy something. Now it's in your house. You don't care. And when that happens, the victim in this sort of relationship spends a lot of effort and energy trying to create those early days of the relationship, when the narcissistic person was trying to win them over and was trying to seduce them, or whatever the word is, but trying, basically seemingly desiring them so much. And I have met people who've been in narcissistic relationships for 15 or 20 years, and they're still trying to go back and recreate the first month of that relationship, because that was the only time it was like that. So it's that sense of craving. I want something so badly, but it's never going to happen again. So that combination of things, the way we write our love stories, the way cultures talk about relationships, the way families talk about it, and the way we sell people this very bad story that women need to be taken care of. I mean, that's ridiculous. And that fantasy of, I want someone to come in and rescue me and take care of me, can really put a person in a vulnerable position. A lot of that is how a society tells its stories.
And what are the strengths that victims need to develop, people who are already in a narcissistic relationship and being abused, and recognizing that from all the awareness being spread about narcissism now? What are the core strengths that they need to develop to be able to take the final decision to end the pain, recover, and move forward?
Listen, in a narcissistic relationship, the usual kinds of skills like communication don't work. So the person who says, okay, now I recognize that I deserve respect and compassion and kindness, which we all deserve, then they walk up to their narcissistic partner and say, hey, I deserve respect, compassion, and kindness. Their narcissistic partner is basically going to tell them to shut their mouths.
Exactly.
They're going to treat them badly and disrespect them and invalidate them. I think the key issue is that all human beings deserve respect, compassion, kindness. Okay, that's everyone. And if you're not getting that and you're in a narcissistic relationship, the key piece for anybody is to maintain realistic expectations in that relationship. Basically, narcissistic people really don't change. These are long-standing, long-held patterns. And particularly if this relationship is happening in a culture where narcissism gets relatively normalized by old traditions like hierarchies and patriarchies and authoritarianism, there's no way that narcissist is going to change. So once a person recognizes that, they will not frustrate themselves and leave themselves feeling powerless, hopeless, and helpless because they can't change their partner. Instead, they're going to recognize, I can't change this person. I have to ask myself what it is I need to do to get my needs met, maybe not in this relationship, but in other areas of my life, and to stop breaking my heart on a daily basis, waiting for this partner of mine to understand what it is I need, because that's just a daily devastation. It's like taking a bucket to a well every day, and the well is empty. The challenge becomes, Sahar, though, is if a person is living in a culture where things like divorce are not accessible, this can be a very, very bleak future for someone. Because the fact is, they may not be able to take that relationship apart, and now they have to recognize, and I've seen people try to get their needs met, as it were, from other family relationships, from friendships, from workplace settings, from their children, and from their spiritual, from their spiritual core, however it is they worship. So the fact is that it may very well be that you sort of see that this relationship, it's like living in a desert, and that you've got to figure out where the small water sources are, because it sure as heck is not in a relationship.
Yes. So I must ask you here, can a narcissist love at all?
This is a complicated question, and I'll tell you why it's a complicated question. It comes down to, what does love really mean, right? I think that when we talk about authentic, unconditional, intimate love, I think it's very infused with empathy and the ability to reflect on the needs and wants and vulnerabilities of another person, while also being self-reflective and being aware of your impact on that person. It's a very open, trusting, compassionate, respectful state. In that way, it's definitely not something that narcissists are going to be good at. They're just not good at this. Now, you got to remember, a narcissist is capable of empathy. They just often choose not to use it. They only use it when it's to their advantage, right? So they'll use their empathy, to close a business deal. They'll use empathy to win over a new girlfriend. They'll use empathy to get advanced at work or to get money from their father. But they will not expend their empathy when they don't care, when they feel there's no value to the relationship. That kind of selectiveness is certainly not consistent with love. The problem is, many, 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 if not most narcissists will tell someone, I love you. And the challenge is their partner will say, there's no way you can love me. You don't do this, you do this, you're mean to me, etc. What love means to a narcissist is very different than what love means to a healthy person. Love for a narcissist may mean sex. Love for a narcissist may mean you're giving me validation and I like that. Love to a narcissist may mean you make me look good in public. Now, if that's not what love means to you, it's going to be very confusing. It's like two people looking at a cup and one person calling it a cup and one person calling it a bowl. I suppose it's something that holds something, but it means entirely different things to the two people. So part of it comes down to a mislabeling issue. As far as the narcissist is concerned, if they view as love as a space of sex and validation seeking and superficiality, they love.
Yeah. Okay.
So this comes down to semantics, and that's why a lot of people get confused in narcissistic relationships, because a narcissist says I love you. They mean it because of what their definition is. And I often tell people, in the first month or two of a relationship, you may want to sit down and figure out what their definition of love is. Most people would make a face at you and say, don't be ridiculous, because out of a narcissistic person, you're never going to get that answer, because they're not going to be in touch with the fact that they're a superficial, vapid, validation seeking, arrogant person. Very few people are going to own that identity. And so, but they will say I love you, and they'll mean I love you, because their definition of love is different than yours.
And so here I have to come to your book, Should I Stay or Should I Go? Surviving a Relationship with a Narcissist, which is considered the manual on surviving narcissism. What's the answer, in your perspective, to the $1 million question for victims of narcissists? In one word, should I stay or should I go? Yes or no?
Go. I mean, but that's not always an option. Why? The reason otherwise, if going was always an option, my book would have been called Go. Exactly. So but in 50% of cases, people stay. So I felt that I had a obligation to teach people how to stay if they can't leave these relationships. But there's no two ways about it. These are not healthy relationships. People stay for a variety of reasons, Sahar. They stay for children. They stay for culture. They stay for religion. They stay for finances. They stay for fear. I mean, they stay for a lot of reasons. So, and it is not my place to judge those reasons. Is it ever going to be a healthy relationship? No, it's really not. But I understand too, I cannot fix those other, those other variables, so they have to make a decision that works for them. But being near a person who chronically invalidates you is never going to be healthy. Being near a person who lies or cheats or steals or controls is never going to be healthy. So in a word, yes, if you can go. I understand it's an option not available to most.
And from your experience in therapy sessions, can narcissists be, let's say, rehabilitated to be able to control their behavior? Because if people are going to be spending time with them, how does that work? Are they going to stay and accept being abused, or what happens?
The rehabilitation of a narcissist is pretty limited. And by that I mean this. In therapy, and I work with many, many narcissistic clients, so I know this territory well. In therapy, we can only get so far. But the biggest problem is narcissistic individuals do not behave well under stress or under disappointment or under frustration. So if a narcissist is having a good week or good month or even a good year, you might actually see that they can kind of get their behavior on point, online. Like they might say thank you a bit more. They may show up on time. They may not lie as much. You might actually be able to get this relationship to a more even place. But the first time something goes wrong, and the definition of what could go wrong varies. For some people, it's they have business problems. For some people, it's they have financial problems. For some people, it's because a child in the family is sick and that's inconvenient. It may be because their brother is doing better than them at their own work. You don't know what's going to disappointment, but under those conditions, they always return to their sort of toxic initial state. And because of that, these relationships can feel like roller coasters, and people get chronically disappointed in these relationships. They'll feel like their narcissistic partner or family member has turned a corner, and then boom, they're right back to the way they always were. They're always going to go back to the way they always were. I have had some cases where I've seen narcissists maybe do a slightly better job of managing some of their anger, slightly better job of managing, like sort of, for example, showing up on time, saying thank you, these very, very small things. But when it comes to those core issues of empathy and being present and being self-reflective, it's really difficult to change that in a person that much once they're an adult. And most importantly, if that narcissistic person does not think there's any problem with them, they're saying, well, there's nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with me. There's no way they're going to make a change because they don't even agree that there's a need for a shift to be made. And that's a real issue. Many times narcissists come into therapy because something's going wrong in their life. Their relationship is falling apart. They're being sued. They're in a lawsuit. Their business isn't going well. And that kind of crisis for them leaves them often feeling vulnerable and depressed. They want to come into therapy, and basically they're stupid enough to come into therapy and think that the therapist can fix all of this in some magic way, like we have a magic wand or a magic pill, which obviously we don't, which then leaves them frustrated with the therapist.
One of your very interesting topics is how to handle a narcissist in the family. As you know, in the Middle East, many adults remain at their parents' homes until they get married, and even then, some remain in very close proximity and daily contact, sometimes in the very same house with the parents. So how can adult individuals who share a home with a narcissistic family member establish boundaries and protect themselves from abuse?
Again, this goes back to what I say is my mantra of dealing with narcissistic relationships, which is realistic expectations. These patterns, first of all, are very intergenerational. They pass from parents to their children, to the next series of children, next series of children. So these have often been long-standing cycles in families, so it wouldn't be unusual for somebody to have a narcissistic parent and a narcissistic grandparents and narcissistic aunts and uncles. And what ends up happening is that these family members can be very controlling, they can be very intrusive, they can be very unkind, they can be very invalidating, which is a really hard way to grow up. It's a difficult message to hear into adulthood. But those realistic expectations tell you, for example, if you have a narcissistic father, this is just who he is. He's controlling, he's unkind, and he's gotten away with it. The fact is, when people get away with a behavior. So let's say I kept walking into a store and I kept taking anything I wanted and not paying for it. I'm going to keep doing it because there's no consequence. Nobody's putting me in jail. Nobody's arresting me. But if there's a consequence, we tend to stop our behavior. But if the narcissistic father or grandfather or aunt or something keeps doing this and always gets away with it, in other words, the family system enables this behavior, they're never going to change. So it becomes, again, that idea of, are there other places you can create healthy relationships, like friendships or, schoolmates or teachers or mentors or someone else who is a healthy, respectful voice, and then unfortunately recognize that in the grand process of having a family, you got stuck with these invalidating family members, but they don't need to define you. I tell people too, when you have a narcissist in your life, in your family, for example, don't over-engage with them. Keep the conversations pretty slim and trim. Don't overshare. Definitely don't tell them your vulnerabilities. I often tell people, don't share your goals and dreams with them, because if you do, they will minimize you, they will mock you, they will tell you you can't do these things. So why would you set yourself up for that abuse? I give this analogy. I'd say, let's say you have a precious vase that's worth thousands of dollars, and if it fell and broke, it would be worthless. Would you give that precious, very fragile vase to a 2-year-old? And the answer would be no. Why? Because the 2-year-old is careless and would drop it. They wouldn't know what to do with it. I always tell people, your hopes, your dreams, your vulnerabilities, and your feelings are as precious as that vase. And a narcissist is like a 2-year-old. If you put that in their hands, they will drop it, they will break it, and they will hurt you. So I always tell people, come up with a list of topics that are innocuous. Maybe the weather, maybe that there's a full moon, maybe that, can you believe that they're doing some construction down the road? Find topics that are really not controversial and that do not show your vulnerability. Don't talk about your personal issues. The less you engage, the better. And most importantly, too, don't explain yourself. When narcissistic family members throw ridiculous, unfounded accusations at you or say terrible things to you that aren't true, don't feel the need to explain yourself. They're not listening to you. They just want to say their terrible things. You're often better off saying, shrugging your face at them and saying, okay, and kind of walking away if you can. and getting yourself out of that situation. Getting into an argument with them is an absolute waste of time.
And how do genders play out in narcissistic relationships, Dr. Ramani? In your therapy experience, have you met more men or women as victims of abuse?
So when it comes to narcissistic abuse, in my practice, while I have to say I've seen many more female than male victims, you have to be aware there are many male victims out there. I'm very careful to say this because I don't want people to feel like, oh my gosh, men aren't being affected by this. First of all, a man can be victimized by a male narcissist. It can be a father. It can be a coworker. It can be someone else. Okay. So the fact is that I think there's no, anyone who's healthy, who gets into any form of relationship with a narcissistic person is going to get burned by that person. I just think in the United States, women are often more likely to seek out therapy, but I actually consider myself very fortunate. My practice is very balanced, and my practice is almost half men and half women, and they're all being affected by narcissists. So I'd have to say in my individual practice here in Los Angeles, it's 50-50. I think maybe if we looked at the world at large, maybe it's a bit more women, but men are absolutely not immune to being victimized by these patterns, by men or by women.
I'm personally very interested in exploring how modern global culture is normalizing narcissistic behavior as acceptable socially. You recognize that narcissism and technology have changed the landscape of love and relationships. So in your book titled, Don't You Know Who I Am? This is your new book, How to Stay Sane in an Era of Narcissism, Entitlement and Incivility. What are your key findings, Dr. Ramani, in your book? How did technology and social media, for example, enhance narcissism and change the global landscape of love and relationships? And what is your best advice for staying sane in this era of narcissism?
I think there's many ways that this has globalized. Number one, what you've got to remember is that narcissism in itself is often a byproduct of authoritarian, paternalistic, patriarchal societies. The more stratified a society is, the more likely you're going to see narcissism and narcissistic abuse. Why? Because there's this idea that the person in power is grandiose and entitled, and they're not really attempting to address the needs of the more vulnerable. Social media obviously has been gasoline on the existing flame of narcissism. There's no way I would ever say social media has caused narcissism, but it's definitely, there was a fire, and now this fire is burning out of control. So social media can be a very, very superficial space. It's very validation and attention seeking, which is one of the key cores of narcissism. And what it can do is pull the intimacy out of a relationship, because many times people are putting forth this inauthentic version of themselves to be able to get validation. It's almost like they're putting out the fantasy, grandiose version of themselves to get validation, rather than being connected to their whole self, to their vulnerable, authentic, at times strong self. There's a lot of that, and what has been happening is we're living in a world where everybody is trying to get attention, and nobody is really paying attention. So a lot of people sort of feel unseen and unheard, and in the pursuit of an Instagrammable life or an Instagrammable relationship, people aren't paying attention to the deeper issues of compassion, of respect, of authenticity, of being a real whole person. Technology has also sped up communication. Many times we just text, and what the problem with texting is, it is very quick. We often don't just check in with someone. It was very interesting. I very quickly was responding to one of my daughter's friends by text because I was in between appointments. And my daughter, who's young, she's, and she approached me and she said, "Mom, why were you so abrupt with my friend?" It was interesting to have a young person call me out. And I said, "I'm so sorry," because the friend was doing me a favor. I said, I was quickly doing it between appointments, but she was absolutely right. I should have opened the text to that friend with, "Thank you so much for being willing to do X or Y." And all of us are guilty of being very quick in that space, which then translates to real life. We've also, through social media, through online platforms, and through the way people can be anonymous online, It is a breeding ground for online trolls and bullies.
Tell me about
by
it.
being anonymous, right? A person can be very courageous while they're sitting home, these sad little insecure people sitting home and criticizing other people because they would never have the courage to say that to somebody's face. And so what it's done, it's created this hostile, cruel, uncivil culture, and not just behind these anonymous messages on social media and news sites and all that. We're even seeing this in world leaders who are cruel, who are unkind, who are invalidating, who say horrific things about people. These are supposed to be our leaders, and they are saying such terrible, invalidating things, often about the most vulnerable people in the world. And uncivil, cruel communication often gets more attention than other kinds of communication. So what happens is those bullies, those uncivil people, get a bigger and bigger platform all the time. And ultimately, Sahar, too, we're in a world of tremendous consumerism. People are judged by the car they drive, the bag they carry, the vacation that they take. That we use these exterior kinds of manifestations of people to judge a person. We know that narcissistic people, in general, often make higher salaries than people who are more agreeable and kind. So these narcissistic people are able to buy the bags and the shoes and the cars and the houses and all these things that show material success. We know that materialism and narcissism are also correlated. So, I mean, all of these things are all coalescing, to create this greater kind of narcissistic energy in the world. And people get confused because so many people want the fairy tale. They want to be swept away. They want to be taken on the grand vacations and be given beautiful gifts. But in that fairy tale, we forget the far more important story, which is that the reason a relationship lasts in a healthy way is because it's characterized by respect and compassion and kindness, not diamond rings and flowers and big parties and somebody who controls your every move. That's not love.
It's funny you say that because in a couple of episodes ago, I was just telling my listeners the connection between narcissism and materialism, and some people just missed that. They couldn't see what is the relationship between narcissistic abuse and materialism. So I'm very happy you brought this up. And I promise I didn't ask you this in advance, right? I didn't ask you.
No.
Thank you so much. So can we at all reverse the toxic effects of the spread of narcissism on a global social scale?
It's not going to be easy. I'm not even going to sit here and say something that's likely to happen. So you asked me the question, how do we stay sane in this landscape, which is really what my book is about. I'd say, once again, got to keep your expectations realistic. Nobody, not me, not the other people you've had on your channel, not you, none of us alone are going to push this back. How can I push back? It's like me pushing back against Amazon or Google or Facebook. I can promise you they're much bigger than me. It's a David and Goliath kind of a battle. So when it comes down to it, I say to people, and there's a phrase I use in my book, and we use it at all my events, called tend to your own garden. What I mean by that is this: in your own life, make kindness part of your life as much as possible. Be respectful and loving to your family members and your partner. Say thank you when you go into a business and somebody pours you a cup of coffee or waits on your table. If you see someone struggling with a heavy bag or something, offer to help them. Tend to your own garden. Populate your space with respect and kindness. If enough people do this, we will create more critical mass. Watch yourself, check yourself online. Don't view your online relationships, your social media, as a substitute for relationships in real life. Recognize that human contact is an essential part of our species, and it's something we need. Build that in to your life. And so I say to people, tend to your own garden. You keep your side of the street clean. And if more and more and more of us keep our sides of the street clean, we're going to create, like I said, critical mass of goodness and compassion against this global trend of interpersonal toxicity. It's not going to be easy, and people who are stuck in these relationships will say, I don't see how this is going to work for me. But there is beauty in the day-to-day, and there's a lot out there you can read and get solace from. But it's not, when you're in it and you're actively experiencing this, the world feels like a very dark, very difficult place, and you feel like you can never get out of it.
Dr. Ramani, thank you so much for being with us today. You've shared some really valuable insights, and we look forward to inviting you back for more conversation if you have the time.
I would love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for tuning in. We have many more special interviews with world experts lined up. Stay with us, and while you wait, please don't fall into the peacock trap. I'm Sahar El-Nadi signing off. See you next time.